Alexander Swift, ANWC past president and executive chair of this epic evening, celebrating feats in journalism and the 90th year of the American Newswomen's Club. Yes, and Bob Woodward, our honoree, is in the room. I'm sorry, I just pinched myself when we had our first planning conference call. I just kept saying, am I really talking to Bob Woodward? Anyway, it's very exciting that I'm a Washingtonian, but I spent time in New York with many journalists who dreamed about becoming Bob Woodward, and so here we are. He has been setting the highest standards for all journalists and now holds the title, after working with me, as Most Gracious Awardee. So move over Walter Cronkite, Barbara Walters, and Norah O'Donnell. So sorry. Bob Woodward is here. It's our privilege to honor him and the excellence he has dedicated to our field for more than 50 years. You look too young for 50 years. You'll hear all about Bob Woodward, the legend, very soon after dinner. Also tonight in the room, I keep pinching myself, emcee Norah O'Donnell, who looks fabulous in the Sally Busby and Sally Quinn. And Robert Costa. Among many past presidents are here, there's a whole past presidents table right over there. And loyal club members and guests, we are so honored, every single one of you. Thank you so much for coming. I just can't believe everyone's here. These are the best of times and the trying. Most trying of times, and we've showed up. So 90 years ago in 1932, it was the fourth year of global depression. The American Newspaper Women Club forged off on its own with founding members from the Washington Herald, the Washington Star, the Washington Times, and the Washington Post. In fact, you'll be happy to know that ANWC's first president was Kate Brooks from the Washington Post. So fast forward to today, 2022, our special thanks and gratitude are in order for the Washington Post for sponsorship. Okay, good. As well as the Marion Mattingly family and Paraton. Thank you. I also wanted to extend special thanks to longtime member Pauline Thompson for bringing a huge crew tonight. Big crew is here. So I only can say that without all that you do for us, we would not be here. Through global pandemics, world wars, and depressions, the ANWC still stands. 52 ANWC presidents later, through hundreds of distinguished speakers and thousands of accomplished members, through 16 U.S. presidencies, with every First Lady a member of the ANWC in the day, not as of late, our members have been very active, asking the right questions and making progress in our quest for knowledge, truth, accuracy, and getting the story right. We've earned our place and hope to do so for 90 more years. Please enjoy your dinner. As we continue with the program, I turn over the podium to ANWC President emcee Andrews. emcee has held the torch high for the ANWC for the past several years through COVID. Thank you, and we are truly, truly grateful, emcee, for her prescient leadership, along with her active career as a senior communications strategist and advisor to Vianovo and Prism Group. emcee served as former special assistant to President George W. Bush for global communications and director of the National Security Council staff. Wow. She attended our alma mater, Holland University, and Harvard, as a politics fellow. We are eternally grateful, lucky to have you, and can't wait to hear from you, MC Andrews. Well, I just have to start out by saying, yes, Claire and I went to college more years ago than we probably would want to admit to anybody. And we have another friend from our same class in the room tonight, so we're very lucky to have everyone here. Claire has distinguished herself as an Emmy award-winning news producer with Diane Sawyer, Sam Donaldson, Tom Brokaw, and Katie Couric. She started her journalism career at the New York Times, working for another legend, Hendrik Snow. Over the last decade, Claire has shared her skills with the American News Women's Club as a past president, a member of the Board of Governors, and we are so grateful for your leadership tonight, Claire. Thank you. We are so lucky to have so many members to thank for everything that they do for the American News Women's Club, and to have a fantastic group of people come out with the evening. I would like to draw attention to one in particular, Ann Gans, if you would please stand up for us. And thank you so much for the amazing cartoon that you drew, and for all of your loving support over the years as a member and as a professional journalist. Thank you, Ann. As we celebrate 90 years, I believe there's never been a more important time for our club to exist. We have political divisiveness, we have the pandemic, and we have had so many things going on in our country. And I think one of the things that we are so proud of is the club has kept going through all of this. And so tonight we're celebrating, of course, Bob's extraordinary accomplishments, 90 years of our club, 3 distinguished scholarship winners that will be coming up in just a few minutes, and the 50th anniversary of Watergate. So now we have a plug in the middle of your table. See the raffle tickets. Please buy them. They are for a fantastic suite at the Watergate for a night, a free night at the Watergate, a tour of the Scandal Suite, and we could not be more grateful to the Watergate Hotel for donating this to our raffle. So please fill out your raffle tickets, and we have folks coming around to collect them shortly. I'm just going to switch to a few more thank yous very quickly here. First, I would like to introduce the remarkable Board of Governors for the last 3 years. So Claire Saunders Swift, please stand, past president and our 2022 gala chair. And I'm asking for our members to stay, to please stand as I read their names. Jean White, I'm sure where Jean is. Sandy Troop, please stand. Jane Pennewell. Fabulous honorary members. Jan Duplain, please stand. Each and every one of you for all of your service and over the last couple of years. I also would like to ask our past presidents to stand. Is Deb Toll with us? Is she able to make it? Margaret Ryan, please stand. So I am so honored to have served with these extraordinary women. I'll just close my remarks by saying, in our lifetime, nothing has touched virtually every single person on the planet what the pandemic has. Yet even during these extraordinarily difficult times, we couldn't be prouder that the American News Women's Club has continued to prosper. Honoring excellence in journalism, giving scholarships to aspiring young journalists, and continuing to have our programs. This year, including our highlights of Nicole Jones, of Susan Page, and I will mention the juvenile justice, because this brings me to my last point. When I joined the club, there was one extraordinary member who took me under her wing and took me to lunch periodically. We had such a great time at the Parthenon. And I so enjoyed it. I know you do. And I was so extraordinary. I found her such an extraordinary woman. And so the first thing I would like to do is ask the table with the family of Mary Mattingly to please stand for a minute. Marion gave so much to all of us for so many years. And I'm now going to ask our American News Women's Club Excellence in Journalism winner, former winner, our governor, chair of our scholarship committee, and the remarkable Eleanor Cook to please come up to share a few words.
Well, we're here to honor the 90th anniversary of this small but mighty club. And a club is only as good as its members. And one of the most extraordinary members of this club, Marion Mattingly, who recruited me into its ranks, probably raised more money than anybody else, recruited more members, and was totally tireless. Former board member, scholarship, she did everything. She was one of those forces of nature that you could not say no to. And she did it all as a woman before women were celebrated for women. She had 8 children. Richard Nixon once said that she was the Republicans' answer to Ethel Kennedy. And she was among a small group of women, Republicans and Democrats, who founded Women on Watch, WOW. I don't even know what year that was, but it was an advocacy program for juvenile justice in Montgomery County, Maryland. And she testified before Congress multiple times, and in 1976, Gerald Ford appointed her to the National Advisory Committee for Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Until her death, December 31st, at age 92, she was the Washington editor and columnist for the Juvenile Justice Update, which is a revered publication within the world of juvenile justice. She was a Republican. I think she thought Nixon was an aberration, and she could stay within the party. When Trump came along, not so much. And I think she used the Reagan analogy. I didn't leave the party left me. She was strong and opinionated, and her family called her Muffin because she didn't want to be called grandmother. She had foundations, advocacy. She was on the food bank. There was not a good cause that escaped Marion's notice. And she was a strong advocate for Strategies for Youth, which is a Boston-based organization that advocates for improved relations between police and youth. She lived long and well, and she was always about the future. 28 grandchildren, 19 great-grandchildren, and 1 great-great-grandchild. So thank you all the Mattingleys who are here tonight. There are plenty more. They can still In that spirit of looking forward, I now turn the podium over to Kimberly Adams, political science professor at East Stroudsburg University. who will present scholarship winners, and who will carry on the great traditions of journalism that we are all here to celebrate tonight. Thank you.
About presenting our top journalism award to Bob Woodward is magnified by the thrill that Norah O'Donnell is steering the evening. Absolutely. Whoa. Norah received our highest journalism award, the American Women's Club Excellence in Journalism Award, 7 years ago, when she was still co-host of CBS This Morning and a contributor to 60 Minutes. Already then a veteran of covering presidents, Congress, traveling the world to interview powerful leaders, she has interviewed now 6 U.S. presidents, including Joe Biden's first network interview in office. In 2019, she was named managing editor and anchor of CBS News, the network's flagship project. She has won a host of awards, most recently an Edward R. Murrow Award for Best Newscast, and in fact her most recent honor is a Columbia DuPont Award for her investigation into sexual assault in the military. Norah is a lifetime honorary member of the American Newsmen's Club, an honorary member of our board, and I am proud to pass the mic to Norah O'Donnell.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, emcee. Thank you, Claire. I have the distinct honor of not only being emcee, but I get to pick the raffle winner. So who's going to have the luxury stay at the Watergate Hotel?
Me.
Here it comes. Moving right along. Did you guys write names on this? Okay, they haven't purchased it. We'll pick it later.
Right, we have gathered some of the greatest journalists of our time to honor Bob Woodward, who I had the distinct pleasure of just spending some time with. As you know, Bob is a household name synonymous with getting the scoop and a man who has inspired generations of journalists. Now, a little biography for those that you may not know. Bob started working at the Washington Post in 1971. He was 28, is that right? A year out of his U.S. Navy service, and his naval service was impressive. He was one of 2 officers on his ship with nuclear codes. No fear there. After 9 months on the job at the Post, the editors sent the junior can't say no guy to the courthouse on a beautiful Saturday morning to cover a burglary at the Watergate. Bob went into the office on Sunday to do a follow-up and meet the other reporter working the story, Carl Bernstein, and the rest is history. And as you know, their reporting is considered by many the single greatest reporting of all time. Bob is currently the associate editor at the Post, and during his more than 50 years there, he has shared in 2 Pulitzer Prizes and authored or co-authored 21 books. All of which have been national nonfiction bestsellers. So we have an exciting lineup of friends with some trenchant insights about Bob, and hopefully some good inside jokes. And of course, at the top of our list was the pepper to Bob's salt, the yin to his yang, the lightning to his thunder, the other half of Woodstein, as their Washington Post colleagues named the dynamic duo, Carl Bernstein. So if you want to know how early Bernstein started developing sources and breaking news, you can pick up a copy of his newest memoir, Chasing History, A Kid in the Newsroom. But remember, the newsroom in that title was not the Post, but the one across town, the Star, which let him get away. And the Post scooped Bernstein up a year later in 1966, and teamed with Bob Woodward, he became a journalism giant and made history. And then post-Watergate, Carl's continued to be a star journalist, 7 books, scores of articles, Washington bureau chief for ABC News for a time, and of course you can still see him on CNN. But nothing but COVID would have kept Carl from being with us here tonight, but he is on the mend, and so he sent along his words, and so we have asked the incomparable Sally Quinn, a friend of both Woodstein, to share Carl's thoughts. So I'll bring Sally up for the first of her 2 remarks tonight. Sally.
I actually talked to Carl this evening, and he got COVID, and he was really hospitalized. He was actually really sick. But he wanted me to pass on his regards to everybody here, and also his love to Bob. And he sent me a few words that he wanted me to read. Hi, this is Carl Bernstein, and I'm here in Naples, Florida with Bob Woodward. It's July of 1973. We've taken over a house owned by Woodward's mother to write a book, and Woodward's orders, each of us has to write 10 pages a day and then show our work to the other one. And if the pages are okay, we're allowed to go out to dinner. Now, Woodward has just given me pages about the Watergate prosecutors. One of the pages is a few yards short of intelligible. And I tell him so. Give it back to me, he says. I know how sensitive he is about this kind of thing, but it's a problem, and I slink back to my little writing room. In less than 5 minutes, he tosses me a new page, irritated. I read it. The detail is amazing. Not only that, but he's built a scene. It brings the whole chapter alive. Let's go to dinner, I say. It's been half a century now of back and forth between us. We've just written a new afterword for the 50th anniversary edition of All the President's Men. Woodward's scene of the prosecutors is still on page 228. It's no less brilliant today. There aren't many people lucky enough to share so many wonderful dinners together as we have for 50 years. Bob, I raise my glass again.
I just asked Sally, can I have that piece of paper? Yeah, I mean, that's my history. Unless you want it. Thank you, Sally. And we're going to hear from Sally just a little bit later. Katharine Weymouth, former publisher of the Washington Post and granddaughter of Post publisher and chair Katharine Graham, very much wanted to be with us here tonight. And since she couldn't, she sent this message. I like and admire Bob Woodward because while he could have rested on his laurels after Watergate, Bob has dedicated his life to writing what my grandfather, Bill Graham, called the first rough draft of history, covering presidents and other major figures in U.S. politics and relentlessly focused on reporting the facts. Bob has this wonderful manner that disarms people and makes them think they can tell him anything, and they do. The woman I'm about to introduce is the new leader of the Washington Post. Sally Busby was named the Post executive editor less than a year ago after more than 3 decades wielding power at the Associated Press, the thrumming heart of news coverage worldwide. She rose to the AP's executive editor and senior vice president. Now Sally has taken the reins of what she calls the essential news source, with the goal of expanding the Post's enormous firepower globally. Already she's reshaped newsroom leadership, naming the first senior managing editor, a chief product officer, and managing editor, 3 new deputy managing editors. A lot of them are here tonight. Thank you for all being here. Plus adding 41 more editors. Is that to support an expanding 24/7 news operation. She described her first step when she arrived as listen and learn. We're now ready to listen to you, Sally. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. I have the great honor of being asked to actually toast Bob Woodward rather than to roast him. So I will try to do a small and pitiful bit of justice to that very large and daunting task. The thing that has always impressed me the most about Bob, and I think probably impresses all of us the most about Bob, is that he still has the hunger, the persistence. Here we are commemorating the 50th anniversary of Watergate. And Bob Woodward had one of the biggest scoops of the year, once again on the front page. The man is a machine. He has all the success in the world. The last thing he needs is another bestseller, but he keeps reporting and he keeps writing. Presidents come and go, many of them thinking that they can get the better of Bob. But con man Bob Woodward, as Donald Trump called him, is always there on Q Street, digging away like there's no tomorrow. Bob has a style of reporting that is both understated and intimidating, as those who have seen him say, and wildly successful, of course. He can sit quietly in a multi-hour interview, never in a hurry to finish, patient, asking questions, always finding ways to get a person to keep talking, and then there are the late night door knocks, the cultural sources, or the excavating of memos and journals and calendars and official emails, an uncanny ability to get critical documents. We take for granted today that getting documents is essential to modern reporting, but in many ways, Bob really helped pioneer that in our craft. All of this is, of course, all meticulously transcribed and filed away, turned into scoops and turned into best-selling books, a sort of true conscience, as a colleague of mine called it today, of the American political establishment over the past 50 years. It is probably fair to say, in fact, that no single journalist in American history has done more to hold the powerful to account, powerful at the highest levels and on both sides of the aisle, than Bob Woodward. If you think about it, Bob was also among the first journalists to establish himself as a brand that word that we hear so much these days. Although he certainly probably did not set out to do that or think of it that way. But in the process, that quote-unquote brand, that persona, that deep reporting that shakes the world, inspired a whole generation of journalists to take up the challenge of holding those in power to account. Which means that the only possible way to end any tribute to Bob Woodward is to say, we are all just looking forward to whatever you dig up next.
Before Bob Costa joined CBS News as Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent, we are very happy about that, Bob. He earned his stripes as a national political reporter for the Washington Post and as a longtime political analyst for NBC News and as the moderator of PBS's Washington Week. Then, last year, he took on a new challenge, co-writing with his friend and mentor Bob Woodward Herald, a #1 New York Times bestseller on the transition from the Trump to Biden presidencies. Before all that, Bob Costa earned degrees from Notre Dame and Cambridge and grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Bob's father, Tom, who used to plant Woodward books in Bob's room when he was a kid, is with us here this evening. Where did you plant them?
Next to a set.
So you read them all too? At the end of Peril, Bob Woodward acknowledges his writing partner, saying, Robert Costa, 35, is half my age, 78, but he exceeds my understanding of politics, Washington, and journalism. Please welcome Bob Costa.
Thank you very much, Norah. Bob, great to be here. Good evening to you all. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here tonight. Please join me in a round of applause for our hosts and for Elsa Walsh, Bob's wonderful wife. Elsa is a supremely talented journalist. She was so warm and kind during my many, many visits to the Woodward home. One time she even offered me a key, but I politely declined. There's only so much Costa one can inflict on a family. But the times we had day in, day out, working together on Peril as a team, it was the most joyful experience of my career. Sipping black coffees together early in the morning on your porch as Edie rolled around the carpet, sipping decafs late at night with a pile of transcripts, talking through interviews, trading stories on everyone from Nixon to Trump, laughing with Elsa and Bob and Claire, our great researcher who's here tonight. What fun, yes, a round of applause. Claire was the secret weapon, along with Edie the dog. But what fun, what a year. For me, it was truly a PhD in reporting, but also a PhD in how to work hard and live fully, how to do things right. And Bob, tonight is a gathering of your friends and colleagues, rightfully celebrating you and those qualities. Bob Woodward, not just as a living legend and great American, but as a confidant, mentor, and leader. During the cocktail reception, I realized we had a very diverse group of people here in this room. In fact, I actually met a reporter who was not writing a book about Donald Trump. Hard to believe. And almost everyone made it here tonight. I know Carl sent his regrets. A few others couldn't make it here tonight. Someone just sent me a few text messages with their regrets. The first text says, Bob, so sorry to miss this. Love ya. Then his second text, stop the Biden crime family and ballot fraud co-conspirators and fake stream reporters. They should be arrested and living in barges off of Gitmo, facing tribunals for sedition. Oh, then there was a third text. Bob, ignore that. Meant for Mark. XOXO, Jenny Thomas. So here we are, 50 years, 50 years after Watergate, toasting one of the two men who are forever linked to their work on that story. Let me ask you all a question. If anyone mentions Watergate, who immediately comes to mind? Woodward and Bernstein, of course. Well, that may be true for everyone in this room, but it's actually a different reality for the National Portrait Gallery. No joke. I just was by there. If you visit the brand new exhibit on the 50th anniversary of Watergate, spoiler alert, you will not find one picture of Bob or Carl. John Dean, Barbara Jordan, Barry Goldwater, Sam Irvin, they're all part of this exhibit, but not our special honoree. Shocking, I know. The art world can be cruel. So unlike politics and journalism. But even in this relentless and competitive world of journalism, Bob has not only survived, but he has truly become the greatest reporter of the past half-century. #1 bestseller after #1 bestseller, unrivaled histories of the American presidency, chronicles of war and decision-making that will certainly be studied for centuries, when future historians and authors wonder, what really happened? What were they saying behind the scenes in the Oval Office? What was the truth? Where are the documents? He holds himself to the highest standards, and no one works harder. Never forget that this is a Navy man from the Midwest. Warm smile and a friend, family man, but very tough. Tough to the core. I've seen it up close, again and again, a witness to that toughness and that excellence. People often ask me, what was it like to work with him? I say it's like spending a year learning golf from Jack Nicklaus or Tiger Woods, or baseball from Hank Aaron. I'm serious. He's a master craftsman. The truth is what matters to him. Finding it, confirming it, publishing it, even if people in power would much prefer for the truth to stay in the shadows. Bob has truly lived a life of no regrets. Well, almost none. There was that time, Bob, that a little-known member of the Washington Post Company's board took you out and encouraged you again and again over breakfast to just put a little money into his fund. Bob, being the straight-edge Wheaton kid, told the guy, some Nebraskan named Warren, that he was focused on his reporting, too busy. True story, and Bob has surely only told that story once or twice. Right, Bob? No regrets. Speaking of finances, after Bob and I interviewed Trump in early 2016, Bob pulled me aside on the street corner outside the Trump Hotel. He had a very serious face. He said to me, be careful now. What we have here is inside information, and it cannot leak. I was still in a daze from over an hour of listening to Trump, so I wondered, what the heck is he talking about? Is it Trump telling us he could be more presidential than Abraham Lincoln, and quote, you can't out-top Abraham Lincoln? Or perhaps it was when Trump told us Nixon failed because of his personality. And quote, Trump said, people didn't like him. I mean, people didn't like him. Bob interjected in the interview, looked at Trump and said, and he broke the law. Trump paused, smiled, looked at Bob and said, and he broke the law. Yeah. But what Bob was referencing on the street corner was Trump's tough talk on the economy as the Republican nominee. Trump had told us the economy was headed for a very massive recession and said it was a terrible time to invest. Bob's point to me was, be careful, be ethical, you have a major player here talking down the American economy, don't go trading stocks, he said. And of course, Bob was right. That's who he is. And I listened, I didn't touch my Fidelity account. Now, I could go on all night with Bob's stories, I really would love to, but like Woodward editing my drafts, I'll once again take his advice, Costa, keep it tight. Tell me what was said, tell me what was happening. Let's keep this moving, scene. I would sometimes go to night with that in my head. Cut it down, let's tighten it up. But two quick scenes that stick with me about Bob. The first, we are stuck in traffic, riding to New York, just ahead of Peril's release. Thanks to the madness of New York and New Jersey drivers, we were stuck for hours. And the stories kept pouring out of Bob, and so did the love for Diana, his daughter, praising her brilliant mind and spirit, for Tally, his other daughter, for her excellent work at the Trace, for his grandchildren, and of course for Elsa. Bob was and is full of humanity. Eventually, he turned to her driver, Naeem, and he asked about Naeem's 4 children. Ever the reporter, he drew Naeem out, on his history as a yellow cab driver, how he migrated into car services, asked about how it all worked. For me, it was watching Woodward, the reporter, the family man, the humanity that's always there, behind the Navy Reserve, the reporting chops, all there in that backseat in traffic. In a final moment, we were strolling into Georgetown one day. We didn't spend all of our time on cue, and we went into Georgetown to grab breakfast. Nothing fancy for the son of Illinois, some eggs, a bagel, and we passed a young family who had a child in a stroller, and Bob just stopped on the sidewalk to say hello. They had no idea who he was. He looked at them and right at the parents and said, "You are lucky. This is one of the greatest times in your life," he said. "Enjoy it." The child, who was probably 2 or 3, was all smiles. The parents looked at Bob and said, "Oh, well, thank you. We are," they said. Bob and I kept moving down the streets through the bustle. He turned to me and said, "I'm lucky." Well, Bob, so are we. Thank you very much.
Years after Watergate, when All the President's Men, the movie, had barely left its first run on the big screen, Woodward was overseeing the post-Metro coverage when John Feinstein worked under him covering cops and courts. Like getting a PhD in journalism, Feinstein remembers. A lot of people have said that. Woodward wasn't happy when Feinstein left news for sports, but it's worked for John. He's been a sports columnist for several publications, a contributor to Golf Digest, commentator for University of Maryland basketball and Navy football, and the author of 45, count them, books. 45. More than half of them are New York Times bestsellers. They include the top 2 best-selling nonfiction sports books in history, A Good Walk Spoiled and A Season on the Brink. Bob once described his longtime friend as brilliant, talented, and hard to harness. And one of the strongest personalities I've ever encountered in journalism. One writer suggested John might be too strong, noting people either swear by him or about him. John recalls that in the years he worked for Woodward, Bob spent a lot of time thwarting Post higher-ups from firing him, a mission that succeeded only because he was Bob Woodward. Let's hear some Bob stories, John.
Thank you, Nora. By the way, I took my jacket off so everybody would know who the sports writer is. And on a serious note, for 1 second, how cool is it that we're here tonight, 2 days after the Washington Post was again awarded the Pulitzer Prize? I think that's pretty cool. It's interesting because 50% of the people in my life who have regularly called me Johnny are in the room tonight. The ones who are not here are my mom and Tiger Woods. I thought sure I'd be the first one to bring up Tiger Woods tonight. But during the brief period when Tiger and I were getting along, he called me Johnny because he puts a Y on every name. He's like a hockey player. And now he calls me a lot of things, none of them Johnny. But the 2 people who have called me Johnny for my entire adult life are Bob and David Marinus, who's had a pretty good career himself, by the way. Yeah. And the other thing that Bob and David share is they both claim they were responsible for keeping me from being fired at the Post when I was a young reporter. And neither one of them's wrong. With Bob in particular, when I was on the Metro staff, there was an editor named Judy Nickel. And Judy Nickel she was a good person. And let me say that. I don't say she was a good editor because I don't believe there are any good editors, personally. Sorry. I still want to work for her. But Judy and I didn't really get along. Judy had this thing where she thought if an editor assigned you a story, you were supposed to do the story. And I had this thing where I thought, she doesn't know what the hell she's talking about. I'm going to do what I want to do. So every Friday afternoon, right, Bob? Judy would walk in and say, Bob, we have to fire John. And Bob would ask why, and she would go through all the things I'd done wrong that week, and she was completely right. And Bob would say, okay, Judy, why don't you write a memo and bring it to me? We all know Bob has a little bit of a Midwestern accent. There's no such thing as a reporter. There are reporters. Okay? But, so Judy would go off and do the write the memo, and would bring it back, and Bob would say, okay, this is good. We're going to put it in John's personnel file. Apparently my personnel file was the garbage can next to his desk. So as a result, I didn't get fired. Now, when Sheila first called me, first called me and asked me to come and roast Bob Woodward, I was like, how do you roast Bob Woodward? I mean, that's like saying to me, find something nice to say about Donald Trump, or Mitch McConnell, or any of those guys. But I did remember this. Bob was a young Republican at Yale. But it was, as you know, it was a different Republican Party. It was much more like the Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln, and Bob knew Abraham Lincoln, so let's cut him some slack. Now, the first time I worked closely with Bob was on a series of stories about a group of Prince George's County police who were killing black teenagers, literally setting them up to be killed. It's hard to believe in today's day and age that there was ever a time when white cops were killing black people. But this was planned. And Bob, I was working on a story with a great reporter named Gene Meyer, and I remember vividly sitting with Bob late one night, and he looked at me and he went, Johnny, you've got to get the documents. And I was like, what the hell does that mean? And what it meant was we had to get copies of the police reports that were falsified to make it look like the killings of these teenagers were flukes and legitimate. And we had to get somebody on the record. And we did. We got a guy who'd been on the death squad on the record. So we wrote the story, had the documents, and of course, the story had to be lawyered by Chris Little, who was the Post lawyer at the time. And so Friday afternoon, Gene, myself, Bob, Ben Bradley, Howard Simons, and Chris Little were in Ben's office. And Bob and Chris went back and forth for an hour. You know, Bob saying, everything's on the record, they've got the documents. Chris saying, you're gonna lose one of the printing presses if you publish this story. And finally, Ben, in his own unique way, sits up and says, blanket, run the damn story. Good enough for me, good enough for all of us. So we were putting the story in the paper the next afternoon. And Gene, who was a lot smarter than me, had gone away for the weekend with his family. So I'm sitting there with Howard Simons, the managing editor, who was a great editor and a better man. And Howard was like Ben's backstop. Because Ben's approach basically, as we all know, was, go with the story. Howard was like, So he's sitting there, line editing, at 6 o'clock Saturday afternoon. Are you sure about this? I'm not sure about this. We should cut this. So finally, 22-year-old genius says, Howard, I can't believe you're getting cold feet on this story. And Howard, who was one of the major editors on Watergate, looks at me and he goes, I don't need some 22-year-old punk telling me how to run this newspaper. And I opened my mouth, and I'm not sure what was coming out of it. But at that moment, a hand slapped over me, and Bob dragged me off to his office. I'm talking about keeping from getting fired. And Bob closed the door, and he said, Johnny, one of the reasons I love you is because you're a fighter. Howard doesn't love fighters. And I said, now you tell me. It's a little late. And the story got what became famously known in the newsroom as Death Squad play. It was on the front page, one column headline. And for years, if you got bad play, you got Death Squad play. Fortunately, everything we wrote turned out to be true. It was Attorney General's investigation backed it up. And Howard called me when the Attorney General's investigation came out, I was on the road. And he said, you know, it's great vindication for the story. And I was about to say, geez, Howard, I didn't know we needed vindication. And I heard Bob's voice. In my head, Howard doesn't love fighters. So I just said, thank you, Howard. Couple more things and I'll get out of here. I was known in the newsroom for doing an imitation of Bob. And Bob took it very well. I had a sports editor named George Solomon who threatened to fire me if I ever imitated him again. And he did about 12 times. No exaggeration, right? And but Bob would walk around the newsroom doing an imitation of my imitation. And trust me, it was awful. It was just, he couldn't imitate himself. One of his few weaknesses. I want to wrap up, as Bob said, with two stories. One is, I wrote a column when Tom Seaver died. Tom Seaver was my hero as a kid, pitcher for the Mets. For those of you who don't know, great pitcher for the Mets. And it was, for me, it was an emotional column because he was my first hero, boyhood hero. And I had been at his 300th win in Yankee Stadium. He was pitching for the White Sox at the time. And I had interviewed him a few years earlier. And when I introduced myself, I said, you know, John Feinstein, I work for the Washington Post. He said, the Washington Post? He said, do you know Woodward and Bernstein? And I said, well, I work for Woodward. I don't know Bernstein very well. Although the first time I met Carl was at a Metro staff party. And he said, oh, it's nice to meet you. Bob's told me a lot about you. I said, oh, thank you very much. He said, it wasn't that good. So now I'm trying to get Tom Seaver to talk to me, and he says, if you tell me everything you know about Woodward, I'll talk to you for as long as you want. So he was terrific. Tom Terrific was his nickname. So now we went to 300th game, Yankee Stadium, and I was in the locker room, and I waited until everybody else was done. And I said to him, Tom, I've never done this before, and it's totally unprofessional, but would you sign my scorecard? And he looked at me and he said, what would Woodward say about that? And then he signed it. I still have it. And when I wrote the column the next day, I got a note from Bob, and he says, here's what Woodward would say. He's very proud of Johnny Feinstein. And that meant so much to me, Bob. The last story I'll tell you, and this is where I stop roasting. I'm going to get choked up there, I really am. About 10 or 12 years ago, I was audited. It was right after my divorce. And I was at lunch at Bob's house with David, as we occasionally get together. And the amazing thing about Bob, and you know this is true, we'll sit there at those lunches, and he asks David and me about how to do a better job as a reporter, how the Post can be better. And I'm looking at him, Bob Woodward, what the hell are you asking me about? But we're sitting there, and I mentioned that I was being audited. And Bob sat up and goes, okay, you are going to go talk to my accountant. You're going to talk to my accountant. And I said, no, I'm fine. And he said, no. If you don't get coached up on this, you're going to jail. I know you. And I said, well, I can't afford it. He said, don't worry about it. And I'm not in jail, am I? So Bob not only kept me from getting fired, he kept me out of jail. I wish he'd been there before my first marriage. But anyway, before I get choked up, Bob, thanks so much. You want this?
There's like 4 words on a piece of paper. There's no speech. That's from memory, which is very impressive. Jonathan Hart, who many of you know is the president and CEO of Simon & Schuster, and the publisher of many of Bob Woodward's, all of Bob Woodward's books, beginning with All the President's Men in 1974, he sent us this note. He said, I like Bob Woodward because he asks great questions, tells great stories, writes great books, and is great fun to talk to, especially on a secure and encrypted device. The common thread here, Bob Woodward is great. That's an editor. Okay, what are the odds that we would have 2 Sallys and 2 Bobs here on this table? I want to introduce now Sally Quinn, a great friend and an incredible journalist. How many of you are watching Gaslit on Starz? Yeah. Well, it tells the Watergate story through the perspective of Martha Mitchell, spouse of Nixon's Attorney General at the time, the most talked about, talkative woman in Washington. Well, Sally Quinn talked with Martha many times and found, quote, she said exactly what she thought all the time and was very clever and very witty and very smart. Sally recently spoke with the Gaslit cast members for a Washington Post podcast. Very, very clever, smart, and witty herself, Sally Quinn became famous both for talking on television, preceding me in the job on CBS This Morning, and then it was called CBS Morning News, right, in 1973, and even more famous for her writing. She was hired by the Washington Post in 1969 to cover the DC social scene and soon became more famous than many of the VIPs that she covered. And no one got better quotes than Sally Quinn. She became pals with the brash young reporter named Bernstein, who had migrated to the Post 3 years earlier. And when the style section assigned her to profile some of the characters involved in Watergate, her path crossed that of a reporter she'd seen around the newsroom, but hadn't actually met, by the name of Woodward. Sally Quinn, what happens next?
Thank you, Nora. I have to say, I hate roasts. I mean, everybody has talked about how they didn't want to roast Bob. And I'm really terrible at them, and that's why I hate them. The last roast I did was for Larry King, and I totally bombed. It was a complete disaster. Happily, I came before Texas Governor Ann Richards, who had people crying and falling out of their chairs with laughter. What she talked about was, she said, you all think that Larry King was a human being. But in fact, he was an alien who had been deposited in the desert of Roswell, New Mexico by a spaceship. Well, when I was asked to roast Bob tonight, I really didn't want to do it, but then I was terrified. But then I thought, well, maybe I could use the Ann Richards line, because Bob really has to be an alien. Because no human being could produce the number of political bestsellers and articles that Bob has. But he swears he was actually born in Illinois. That's true. So after I agreed to speak, I was asked by Sheila Tate when I had met Bob, and I replied by email. Well, Sheila, I can't remember exactly when we met. I was in Style. He was the new kid in Metro. Bernstein and I were close friends. I saw Bob around the newsroom, but we were never formally introduced. We became closer during Watergate coverage, as I was also writing about some of the Watergate characters, and it was then that Ben and I had started living together. I hope this helps. I hope they will be high on booze when I make this toast, because it's going to be very personal. So Sheila responds, this is all by email. Wait, what? I did not know that you and Bob Woodward had lived together at some point. Is that something we should tee up in the instant? Or should that news, because I think it would be news to most folks in the room, especially the younger ones, even me, who is in your generation, that you want to divulge yourself as you speak? Or do you want not to divulge it?
A pleasure to hear Feinstein. Because one of the things you didn't know, his whole shirt was untucked and flapping. And every time he would lie, it would flap even harder. No, he doesn't lie. Thank you, all of you. I mean, this is important moment for Elsa and myself. I am standing here because of remarkable women in journalism who have helped me in the most fundamental and essential way. Many of us are probably here because of those women. I want to focus tonight on Kay Graham, the original for me. In many ways, I hope she still lives in my work. She certainly lives in my heart. Is there this photograph? Yes, see this photograph? You would think it was actually a photo taken in 1925. It was taken in 1975. Kay and 5 of the white guys, the AP board of directors. I mean, what a metaphor. Kay was probably the only one who didn't have a golf handicap. The publisher of the Washington Post, such a strong woman, relentlessly engaged, making sure that her editors and reporters could get the story. In her memoir, Personal History, published 25 years ago, 1997, she showed at times scalding, breathtaking candor about herself and others. She insisted on listening to critics and loved a good story. She worried about unsafe concentrations of power, particularly in the presidency. In my first serious conversation with her, we called her Mrs. Graham at this time. It was early in Watergate. Carl and I have been working for about 6 months on it, so it's January 1973. She and Katharine said, maybe I better find out what's going on in this story. So she invited Carl and myself up. Carl had to go to a funeral, and so go in, lunch, eggs Benedict. For lunch? I couldn't believe it. Who had eggs Benedict for lunch? Katharine Graham. I was 29 and had been at the Post for a little over a year. And she asked the killer question as we got to discussing Watergate. She said, are we ever going to get to the bottom of this? I told her I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure that all of it would come out in the end. And she said the following, never? Don't tell me never. Carl and I had not told anyone at that point the identity of our secret source, Deep Throat, though Kay at this point knew from Ben Bradley, the editor, there was a secret source, and so she said, tell me, who? I started to answer, but before I could, she touched, this is in her memoir, she touched my arm and said, she was only kidding. I don't want to carry that burden around with me, she said, smiling. Of course, the source was Deep Throat. I would have told her that day, but it was 32 years before Mark Felt, the deputy director of the FBI, was identified. I came to realize her leadership style was hands off, mind on. She was not going to tell reporters or editors how to report or what to report, but what a mind she had. She wrote in her memoirs about Watergate, quote, I lay awake many nights worrying. Beyond its very reputation, the very existence of the Washington Post was at stake. I'd lived with White House anger before, but I had never seen anything remotely like the kind of fury and heat I was feeling targeted at us now. The FCC licenses that the Post Company were under attack with and even at the time of Watergate, I only learned this later, much in her memoir, it was an ugly, well-financed challenge by Nixon supporters. In her memoir, she said, "I'm not a good combatant. Generally, I hate fights and would like to run from them." Not so. When the courts wanted our Watergate notes, she took them for herself, said to the lawyers, "They're my notes. I run this institution. Let the courts come after me." She would be the one hauled to jail. Ben Bradley was ecstatic and said, "Can't you see the picture of her limousine pulling up to the D.C. Women's Detention Center? And out gets our gal, going to uphold the First Amendment, going to jail." That, Ben, not modest, said that picture would run on the front page of every newspaper in the world. Of course, the new note seekers backed down. Katharine often said she got too much credit for standing up to the Watergate story. Quote, "The truth is," she wrote, "I never felt there was much choice." On this, I believe she was wrong, completely wrong. As the Post's owner, she could have closed down the aggressive reporting. She could have starved the newsroom of its resources. She could have created an atmosphere that said, let's not challenge authority even when it is provably corrupt. This is what, of course, many of her peer owners did. At one point she wrote, as the Watergate struggles went on, this was after the Pentagon Papers. The Pentagon Papers took 2 weeks to resolve. This took over 2 years. She said to Bradley at one point about Watergate, "If this is such a goddamn good story, where is everyone else? Why are we alone?" And the other, I'm going to tell some private stories about, because she was our friend, Elsa's and mine. She lived a block and a half away. She invited us to her parties regularly. Interestingly enough and significantly enough, she introduced me to Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, that eventually led to the book on the court, the Brethren. She introduced me to Bill Casey, Reagan's CIA director, which led to the book Veil. But she too was a secret source. She had a rule. If any Post reporters or editors attended one of her dinners or a social occasion at her home, she bound everyone, it's all off the record. I believed this for a while. Then one morning she called me after a dinner and she said, "Oh, the Secretary of Defense was here last night and he had so many interesting things to say." "Oh, wait, hang on, let me get my notes." I wrote everything out before I went to bed. She came back on the phone, read them to me. They contained several really excellent stories that we followed up on from getting other sources. After this, I teased her that she really had developed and practiced a grand rule and modification to off the record. And then that is, it was off the record unless it was really good. Not so, she said, laughing. She made the point that these officials would not tell someone in the news business these things if they really wanted to conceal them. There was always another way to the story, she said, laughing and smiling. Particularly, there is another way to the story if you already know what it is. Bradley once said to me, when I had suggested that there were some defects in the paper, and Kay and I were talking, said, what do you think about the paper? And I don't know what I said, you know, I've had some criticism, and she then, and this is in her memoir also, she said, she actually wrote out, and she remembered what I said, and she said she had talked to Bradley, and they got kind of in a disagreement, and so I had to quote to Ben what you'd said about the paper. I said, hey, what did you say? And she said, well, you said the paper was going down a shithole. Accurately quoting my words. It was a bad day. I called and apologized to Ben, and in fact, Sally, maybe you remember, I came over and visited you, and I went through some of my objections, or my idea. I mean, it was so stupid to ever say anything like that. And Ben was great about it, and then she said, then after, sometime later, Ben said to me, remember this, if you tell her something, she will use it, just like you. Katharine was tough. One day I was on one of the Sunday morning talk shows, and I went to the office at the Post afterwards, and the phone rang, and it was Kay. She said, hi, I saw you on television. And I said, oh, good. What'd you think? You were terrible. You smirked. Always teaching. After Nixon resigned, she sent Carl Bernstein and myself a letter. She had more stationery than any 500 people in Washington. But this letter came on a sheet ripped from a yellow legal pad. Dear Carl and Bob, Nixon is gone, and you did some of the stories. Quote, but don't start thinking too highly of yourself. Let me give you some advice. Beware the demon pomposity. Beware the demon pomposity. Good advice for all. Katharine Graham, a great leader and always a wise teacher. Real quickly, the second woman who made my work possible was Alice Mayhew, editor of 19 of my books over 46 years at Simon & Schuster. She was ruthless in her devotion to the truth and telling the story well. She was a master of tone and pace. If you'll bear with me for this story, Carl and I, we have the first draft of All the President's Men, and we're holed up in the St. Regis Hotel in New York City. This is December 1973, and we're working through it with Alice. She would come in each day and work with us, and she came over to me, and she had a big stack of papers from the manuscript, And she said, you know, this 90 pages needs to be cut down. How much, I asked. 2 pages, she said. I said, oh, that's easy, cut 2 of the 90 pages. No, she said, from 90 to 2. And she was right. And David Marin was edited by Ellis for how many books? Many, and was a great friend of hers, as were Elsa and I, and Alice Mayhew she was very secretive, very private. No one knew how old she was. And then after she died in 2020, somebody ferreted it out, and she was 87, believe it or not. Next woman, Elsa Walsh, my wife. Will you stand? No. My wife has been the de facto, on the scene, in-house, hands-on, pen at the ready editor of 18 of my books and countless writings for the Post over 40 years. Elsa is a former reporter for the Post, staff writer for the New Yorker, author of her book, Divided Lives. The other night I happened to be talking to Liz Cheney, the independent-minded Republican Wyoming congresswoman. And she told me, Liz said, how's Elsa? And I said, fine. She said, her book, Divided Lives, helped me navigate and balance a career and motherhood, as many have said. Elsa's handwritten notes, edits, and questions on a page often exceeded the number of typed words on that page. Robert Costa witnessed and participated in this last year as we did our book Peril together. We thought of it as the Elsa process and always held our breath until new pages had gone through the Elsa process at least once. Claire McMullen, Claire, stand please, just wave. My assistant, I get to see now, and Costa and I saw when we were doing Peril, the rigor, discipline, and intelligence of this generation of women journalists. Claire is an Australian-American lawyer. She has worked on investigations in Australia, Guatemala. She transcribed the Khmer Rouge genocide trials in Cambodia 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. For Costa and myself, she transcribed 6,000 pages of recorded transcripts for Peril. She is tireless, improves everything she touches. Claire is age 28. And her mother, who was coming to visit soon from Australia, was the Deputy Communications Director in the White House for a president named Ronald Reagan. Sally Quinn. Sally, thank you for your remarks. Everyone here knows Sally, knows she, and we all know she's a journalistic force herself. She runs an old-style Georgetown salon in the tradition of Katharine Graham. Some people said there's lots of gossip exchanged at the dinners and parties that she had. Elsa and I refer to it as an ideas festival. Dinners, gatherings. Elsa and Sally talk regularly, at times an hour on the phone. She revealed, I call it the Daily Sally. I get only an executive summary at the end of the day. But we all know that Sally has her own CIA of deep cover human sources. Sally Busby, I wish Katharine Graham were alive to see the new executive editor of the Washington Post. We are so fortunate to have such a strong and innovative leader at the Post. Katharine Graham, were she here, she would instantly forge a bond with you. Sally made sure Harold that Costa and I wrote was treated seriously as news in the Post. She saw that several stories Costa, now at CBS, and I have done together received front page treatment in the Post, even in the midst of the Ukraine war. In Sally's first year, she steered the Post to the Public Service Pulitzer Prize, the gold medal in journalism, for a massive series on January 6th, the assault and insurrection at the Capitol. Sally and the Post have created, I believe, a new model for flood the zone coverage of a major historical event. The result of that series has a weight and a fullness and an authority that even a long newspaper series or television documentary can achieve. It is really something new and original that the Post and others in the media will duplicate. National Editor Matea Gold, will you stand up so we can brought that all together? And again, this is a theme from Katharine Graham. She would always say journalism is a cerebral undertaking. You've got to have the right idea, and you and many others have the right idea on this. Carol Lennick was all over it. It's her 5th Pulitzer Prize. I'm going to say this, as Bradley might say, eat your heart out, Tom Friedman, who has only won 3 Pulitzer Prizes. And for this, the boys at the Post did a magnificent job. Managing editor Cameron Barr, I've seen many managing editors at the Post. He's the best. Stan Chandler. Super editor Stephen Ginsburg. And Phil Rucker, who is everywhere, all the time. You turn on MSNBC and you think it's not that he has his own show, but he has 3. All this proves that journalism is not a solo mission for anyone, but a collaboration and integration of ideas and resources. Katharine Graham also said something that applies to tonight. Quote, to love what you do and feel that it matters. How could anything be more fun? Thank you.
Sending in revisions to his remarks. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being